You are listening to the Playlist Podcast. I'm your host, Eric McClanahan, and with me today via Skype is contributor Corey Everett. Hey, Corey.
Hey, what's up?
Not much. Managing editor Kevin Jagernath. How's it going, Kevin?
Good, man.
Good. And, of course, our fearless leader, Rodrigo Perez. How's it going, RP?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. It's good to have you guys on. Over at the Playlist on the IndieWire blog network, we occasionally like getting together to discuss a topic we feel is worthy and large enough to sustain a whole podcast. Today, we're gathered to talk about the idea of auteur worship in cinema, why we love them, why some love them too much, and why this affects, defines, and potentially hurts criticism. To kick things off, let's start with our thoughts on the film that kind of spurred this topic, Terrence Malick's To the Wonder, which is out in most art house theaters in major cities right now. Corey,
and VOD.
Oh, and VOD. Yeah, don't forget that. So Corey, why don't you want to lead off with your thoughts on Terrence Malick's To the Wonder?
Sure. Yeah, I caught this at Toronto last year, which I believe is also where Kevin saw it, and I was really not a fan. I probably run counter to a lot of people where I'm more of a fan of Terrence Malick's earlier movies than I have been his last couple. But even so, like Tree of Life, I found a lot that I enjoyed in it, but it still left me a little bit cold overall. But this was really this movie did nothing for me, honestly. I thought it was basically like a series of taped acting rehearsals. There was nothing for me to grab onto, and it even seemed like the actors in the scenes were just lost and like had no direction, nothing to work with, and I couldn't even kind of buy into like, okay, these are characters, and I'm just watching something kind of play out wordlessly. It just honestly seemed like kind of, basically rehearsals that were kind of taped and strung together, and it just didn't work for me at all.
Okay. Kevin, how about you, man?
I'm the polar opposite. It's not my favorite Malick film by any stretch. There's certainly a lot of problems with it. But for me, I found the sort of emotion running through it to be a powerful thing, and the themes that he's addressing with love and faith and things like this. Pretty rare. Like, we don't really see many filmmakers, American or otherwise, kind of taking it on or doing it in a style that's so earnest. And for sure, I think it's off-putting. It can be off-putting, and I know there's more than a few people who feel that way. But for me, those issues aside, like the problems that it does have, what's going on beneath all that is so compelling that it really spoke to me. I dug it.
Fair enough. And RP, how about you, man?
I guess one could say I'm leaning closer towards Corey. I just I admire it, and I admire its exploration and its desire to strip down narrative and it's I kind of see it as more like fleeting ephemeral glimpses of memory and longing. It's almost like a long series of recollections about someone you loved, and then there's the whole faith and spirituality theme, and I like all that on paper. It just doesn't really move me very much. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I'm just not emotionally very engaged. I'm engaged occasionally here and there. There's a few moments that are like kind of beautiful, but it's like Terrence Malick's work generally, when it's, he's generally exploring something, and then he usually produces some kind of, wonder and awe. And I feel like this fell a little short of that. It's just not as, I guess, deep, if you want to say that I found his previous films.
No, I mean, I totally agree, Rod. I kind of think the big problem with this movie is that it's as shallow as a Michael Bay movie in a lot of ways. I mean, maybe first off, now that I just said that, I do want to avoid hyperbole as much as possible on this podcast. And I know I just did that, but I feel like I can back it up in a lot of ways because Corey basically transcribed my thoughts on this film. Honestly, this is one of the worst movies I've seen this year. And it really hurts me to say that.
Because I
Well,
was
here's
just
the,
gonna
well,
say,
hang on. Let's like shallow in what way? I mean,
So,
and
okay.
also
not,
worst movie of the year. That's hyperbole, Eric.
Yeah.
I know. I'm putting it up there with films that I really did not like as much, and so by calling it one of the worst films of the year, it's a personal choice. Like I've seen a lot, especially in the last few months, of films that have kind of blown me away. I feel like the last 2 months have been incredible for 2013 for movie releases. And so I'm comparing it against a lot of movies that have floored me, like literally, like in the moment while I'm watching them, and also after the fact. I just can't stop thinking of them. I'm specifically thinking of like Spring Breakers, Place Beyond the Pines, Trance, films like this. And then I go to see To the Wonder, and is it unfair to compare to movies that have nothing to do with the kind of movie it is? Yes, but I was left cold and frustrated by the time this movie was over. But to get into specifics, Kevin, because that's the only way I can back up a hyperbolic statement like that, which I admit it was. You talked about the themes involved in this film, like just a little bit, Kevin. And for me, this movie actually betrays one of its main themes. And to me, the big theme was choice. The fact that Ben Affleck it's a very simple, almost non-story. Ben Affleck has to choose between two women. For the most part, can we all agree that is mainly what this movie is about?
I kind of disagree, but
okay,
Yeah, I kind of disagree too.
Let me follow this thread, and then we'll go back to yes. I think it's mostly about choice for the Ben Affleck character, and you could argue that he's not even the main character, but still, he needs to choose between two women. He actually does that at one point in the movie, but then the way the film is done is that we're led to believe that the women in his life, specifically, let's just go with the Olga Kurylenko character. He chooses her. I don't think it's a spoiler to say he chooses to be with her, but the way that the film portrays her is that we're always kind of seeing. She personally, I found her to be a very annoying character, and we're seeing that it's the tactic that Malick takes in making her this sort of grand. It's a very similar type that he's been doing in cinema, in his movies lately, as far as like make.
Yeah, he idealizes women.
Exactly. Okay.
And to this point that they become, I could see your use of the word shallow, where I don't think her character is shallow. I think she comes off a little bit shallow because all she's doing is twirling.
Yes.
And like he idealized Jessica Chastain as this divine mother in To the Wonder, and when it becomes
Tree of Life. Tree of Life.
Yeah, and then he did the same thing with I forget her name, the Native Indian girl. Yes, in
Bianca Kilcher or whatever.
The New World.
Mm-hmm.
And so in with good intentions of like trying to in his own way, I guess, worship. The danger there is that he's creating reductive singular characters with no much of an identity. They are projections of other people's feelings, but that's also part of the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it gets dangerous because and I think it works in Tree of Life, and I think it works in the New World, and this is where I think it doesn't work here because she's just this idealized romantic.
Cypher.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and to me that doesn't work in this film. I agree.
I agree.
Because she comes off as more annoying and grating when she's the one that actually has a really good point in the movie. Like Ben Affleck needs to get up. Like, if anything, she's really annoying because she believes in this thing that I think Malick does too, and like love is this like thing that will kind of cure all, or love is something that makes two people into one. I find it to be a really immature movie in a lot of ways too.
I took a totally different reading. I think To the Wonder is a lot harsher about people's ability to love than I admit than the relatively simplistic characters project. I think the film here is saying that it's really hard to love someone completely because we're in a world of spiritual loss and things like that. I think and that's for me what made the film so compelling, is that you have these really beautiful images and beautiful actors and all of this, but the underlying sort of point is that it's really, really hard to devote yourself fully to one person or to a love, because I think what Malick is trying to say is that we live in this world that's sort of spiritually abandoned, or God has left us, or whatever. And I think that's kind of interesting. That really spoke to me in the film. And in terms, and I don't think he's necessarily saying that, love will cure all. Um, I think within the film, Affleck has this relationship, and then when it starts to sour, he's almost looking nostalgically at the past when maybe that's not ideal with Rachel McAdams. I mean, I think there's a lot more things going on there than just love is curing everything. So let's go twirl in a field.
I think,
but there's a lot of twirling. Go ahead, Corey. Sorry.
I was going to say, Kevin, I think the movie you're describing sounds like a really interesting one, and like on paper, that's why I was actually interested in, Malick doing this kind of broken love story in a contemporary setting. Like, it sounds like something different. It sounds like something that could be really interesting for him to explore. It's just the execution of it I didn't think worked at all. As Eric was saying, it just kind of grated on me the way that there was just scene to scene, nothing for me to really grab onto, and no kind of relatable behavior, and I wasn't really swept away in the beauty of it, and it really didn't have almost anything to offer me. I mean, it wasn't even kind of a mixed feeling of certain scenes were working for me and others weren't. It just, the entire movie kind of flatlined, where I just kind of rejected it as, this isn't the way people behave, and I'm just not interested in it.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Part of this discussion, we're talking about criticism, and I think what maybe is I find myself taking this position often because it just comes naturally to me. But there's a tendency to jump to the worst film of the year, the best film of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is bad, this is great. I feel like there needs to be, and this should be part of our larger conversation, and the larger conversation and discourse about how we consume movies, how we criticism is trying to understand. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily love To the Wonder, but I'm trying to understand it, and I feel like Kevin is making some. And I agree with Corey at the same point. I think Kevin is describing a movie that I didn't personally feel so much, but I think he's absolutely right that those are the things that Malick is going for. It doesn't necessarily, and I totally see that, it just doesn't necessarily emotionally move me, or it didn't, those are the things he's going for, but it doesn't really penetrate me. But anyhow, I guess part of this conversation, as I would always, as sort of a plea to try and understand, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And try and understand what a filmmaker's going for, and to, I don't know, sometimes you don't want to get too reductive, because that's dangerous and unhealthy to the discourse in general.
I totally agree, and I'm really glad you brought that up, Rod, because I know what I sounded like, the things I said. I believe that is my belief in film criticism as well. Exactly what you're saying. I think that's a big part of what the playlist is all about, is not so much the letter grade as it is the review. Roger Ebert used to say that. Don't look at the 4 stars or the 3 stars. Read my review, and you'll know if the movie is worth. And even though
and then on going on that, so don't worry about the review or the star. Don't compare the star to a star on another film, because
exactly,
it's orange and apples. And then going back to your earlier point, Eric, those other films, Trance, et cetera, you loved, have nothing to do with this movie.
Yes.
And you should take this movie on its own, and review it and judge it on its own merits, and you shouldn't come in with it's supposed to be this, I was expecting this. Expectations have nothing to do with movies.
Yep.
I mean, they're always there, and you're going to assume a movie is this or that, but it really shouldn't have anything to do with your evaluation of a movie. You may have expected something, but so what? You should try and strip yourself of expectations when you're reviewing a movie, and I feel like you should just evaluate it on its own and its own merits. And a B+ for A movie is a different from a B+ for C movie, because they're totally different movies, and you're grading them independently.
Here. I totally agree, and I do think you can compare it to other movies of its ilk. I've always thought that that's fair to do in a review, so why don't we do the only thing we can really compare this to, I think, is other Malick movies. Do you guys think that's worth getting into a little bit? Because I think
no,
it
not
is.
so much. I think it's the same thing. It's they're all different beasts. I mean, yes, and then
really
and then
though,
we're getting,
are they? I mean,
yeah, but then we're also getting
for
into,
sure.
and then we're also getting into auteurism, our exact subject. It's this person, this thing that they do, and then this style, this brand. That's what worries me about auteurism, or the subscription. Like, I subscribe to this auteur, is that it's like it to me it's a bit of that this is the brand. This is the Matador records that someone loved in their 90s, or this is the Nike that I love to wear, or the things that define you and then to create your identity. Like, that to me is unhealthy, and it doesn't help the discourse either. It's people tend to rally around someone, and the Cahiers du Cinema guys, you could argue, were just fanboys who were like, hey, this is the things that I love, and I'm going to rally around it. And I mean, it's all built in passion, so there's nothing wrong with it, but it can curdle and coalesce into a way that's unhealthy. And so, like, I guess we're getting into that whole, this is kind of what I wanted to get into, like the idea of of not necessarily auteur worship, although that's part of it, but like that's sort of where it blinds you, and it's like, this is the brand I love, and this is therefore I'm supposed to love this, and those kinds of ideas, I guess.
Right, and I would say that I've never been I could never be described as a fanboy of Terrence Malick, but I do think his first 3 films, Badlands, Days of Heaven, and then the 20-year gap to Thin Red Line, are fantastic. Especially, I think Badlands and Days of Heaven are easily masterpieces, I would say. But he's losing me with these last 3 films. New World, I wasn't very big on. I've kind of reappreciated on a second viewing. Tree of Life, I think, has an hour or an hour and a half of just brilliance in there, but it's bookended by these modern-day segments that, to me, just didn't work. So I couldn't be described as a fanboy of him, but I do think I can say that I liked him at one point, and I don't. So I'm cautious about going into his films now. Do you guys, any of you, agree or disagree with that as far as Malick, or are there other filmmakers of this ilk that this has happened for you?
Well, again, I'm just like, I'm a little wary of defining it by like, I like or / love or adhere to this person. I'm an adherent of this person's films, and now I'm like and do not like.
Okay.
Can I just ask, Rod, is the reason you're getting into this, do you feel like people are reviewing this movie and maybe giving it a pass or trying to find things to love in it because they love Malick? And is that where this came up?
Yes and no. Yes, what you just said. No, in the sense that I think that's in general in what happens. You know what I mean?
I don't think anyone is giving To the Wonder a pass. I mean, it's probably his worst reviewed movie in his career.
That's true. But I just think I think it applies in general to auteurs. Corey, like your exact question, I think it's beyond Malick, and I think it applies to many auteurs. And then it also, like Kevin says, there was worst reviewed film. Is it because he is an auteur? Is it because we and other people love him and are adherents to him, and they have a certain expectation of him, and this doesn't fit into his so-called album scheme? Is this not, is this, I don't know, is this the bad Tom Waits record 10 years down the road that I don't love so much? Or, you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
I pretty much agree with what Rod says. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with being a fan of a filmmaker. Lord knows I'm a fan of many filmmakers, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that I just sort of blindly love everything they do. I'm interested to see where they go, what they decide to do, and I think auteurism also is damaging to filmmakers. I think it kind of can cause people to box them into certain boxes that might be unfair.
I agree.
I think there's nothing wrong with being passionate about a filmmaker, nothing wrong with being excited by a filmmaker, but I do think it's important to always keep an open mind, to always be able to be critical when they're not good, and also be able to see when they're doing well and to celebrate it. So I think there is something to be said for being cautious and for being open-minded, because I think the most exciting filmmakers for me are the ones that change and evolve and try different things, and that's what makes me excited to be a fan of a filmmaker. I don't want to see someone doing the same thing for 20 years. Like, to me, that's just boring.
To be fair, I completely agree with you. But some of my favorite filmmakers, and I think the favorite filmmakers of others, including some of you guys, are doing the same thing over and over again. We could argue that Terrence Malick does the same thing over and over again. He's exploring the same kind of themes and ideas over and over again. I would definitely say James Gray does that, Kevin, and that's someone that you and I like. And I think
Wes
James Gray is
Anderson?
almost
Wes Anderson's the big
yeah,
one.
yeah. And so there's something to be said about that.
Well, I
don't
think
want to
it's
completely discount it.
Yeah. I mean, there's something.
But then there's the opposite. There's the Soderbergh or the. Danny
I guess
Boyle.
what I'm driving at is filmmakers who, even if they repeat the same sort of themes, they're doing it in interesting ways.
Right.
Rod,
Yeah.
do you?
But that,
Rod,
I mean,
go ahead, Corey. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, but I think if you're following a filmmaker, kind of the same criticism could apply regardless of whether they're doing the same thing or they're doing different things. Because if there's somebody like Soderbergh who's trying, at least on the surface, to do different things every time out, that's something you respond to. So you can follow him just as well as you could follow Wes Anderson, who is much more making the same type of movie in the same type of way. But it doesn't. I don't see that the criticism wouldn't apply if you're as much of a fan of someone who does something different. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Following the filmmaker is kind of following the filmmaker, regardless of whether you expect them to give you something similar to what you like, or whether you like that you're always going to get something different. I think it's kind of, the same skepticism should apply to whatever they do next, regardless of if it's going to be, similar or different to what they did last time.
That's a good point. I think that there is value in beyond, you follow a filmmaker and looking and seeing trends or, kind of looking at their filmography as a whole. I do enjoy that personally, and I'm just curious if you guys think that there's no value in that or any at all. Why don't we start with Ron?
There absolutely is. I mean,
Okay.
I think that's why half of us are here.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think that's why most of us are here.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you can't. I'm not saying Auteur is the worst thing in the whole world. I'm not saying you can't I'm just saying people need to be aware of the idea of the the potential. I think some of it can be detrimental to the discourse, and so that's why I see be wary of the brand. You know what I mean? Like, don't just like. I guess to give a little quick specific example, I saw someone on Twitter, and they were talking about Spielberg, and they were saying something was amazing. And this is a person, I'm not going to say who they were, but they were bringing up something that was pretty schmaltzy, and in the hands of any other critic or any other filmmaker, they would have destroyed. Because you know what I mean? But because it was Spielberg, it was okay. And I find that kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, the pass that people will give certain directors.
And I would argue that like Stoker got a pass because it was Chan-wook Park. I mean, I know I was really hard on that film, and I'm sure in retrospect, like that's such a pan and such a reductive, like I hate. But I just didn't. I just felt like that movie was.
Your review was spot on, man. I disliked it as much as you did.
I think your review was the points and the film that you saw and that experience that you put into your review, Rod, was accurate. I saw the same things. It's just, I got to be honest, I read your review after seeing the film. I reread it. And I'm not going to argue Stoker is a great movie, but I enjoyed it for the exact reasons you hated it, Rod. And because...
And that's valid, Eric. That's
okay.
fair.
Yeah, and it's valid. Not, and I admit to being a huge Park Chan-wook fan, but I probably went in there even, which is not fair to the film, really. I went in there with these skeptic notions based off of our chat about the film before, and I came out thinking that, you know what, this is like early Brian De Palma. Like nobody, like Brian De Palma hasn't made a movie this good in 30 years, that's maybe not quite that, but I really enjoyed it, and I kind of just was able to enjoy the film for the film and not worry about, how does this fit into Park Chan-wook's filmography?
That's good. That's exactly what I'm advocating for. So
totally.
I would say I'm glad.
I'd also argue, and I'd also argue that Stoker is impressive. Just not to get too lost on this thread, but Stoker's impressive because it's one of the rare English language debuts by a foreign filmmaker that completely retains the style of that filmmaker. Look at The Last Stand from Kim Ji-woon earlier this year. That guy isn't exactly like an auteur, but he has a noteworthy style in his previous films, like Bittersweet Life, I Saw the Devil, but it's almost completely lost in that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, which is not a shit fest, but it's not that great, or it's really just not that good. So I just found it impressive on that level too, that this guy had the right situation to keep his weird point of view as messy and not always making sense as it does, like it's there. It's there in that movie.
Part of it might be, just to be a little simple about it, is that one is he's working with Fox Searchlight. The other one is you get lost a little bit in the Schwarzenegger brand.
Yeah.
Well,
that's true.
I don't know. For me, Stoker's an example of a filmmaker whose style just completely gets in the way of the material.
I agree.
I think my main issue with Stoker is that it's presenting this sort of Hitchcockian movie, or this Hitchcockian tale, but completely misunderstanding about what makes Hitchcock films so suspenseful. It's that we see ordinary characters do terrible things, and that's a powerful thing. But here, everyone in Stoker is a freak show, and it's a freak show on top of, like, every shot has to be stylized to the degree where I think it just deadened. Like, it's just, to me, after like 5 minutes, I'm just like, okay, like, I don't need to see another, fabulously, like, great camera move or whatever. Like, just tell me the story.
Yeah.
And maybe drop all this artifice, because it took me right out. Like, I just didn't care. Like,
it's like
and
stylized
also
to death.
It really is.
And like, I mean, if I see like another Dutch angle in that movie, I'm like gonna strangle someone, you know.
But I want to go to Corey after I just chime in real quick. I just want to counter that. I think the script for Stoker is pretty terrible, and
It is.
Agreed.
And I honestly think that Park Chan-wook knew this and kind of overloaded his style even more. He made it into a director's movie. The script is shit. Like, it's not, to me, that movie is not that movie is not about the suspense. It's not. It's not about a hitch.
But I don't know. Are we
say it's
projecting a bit too much to say that a major filmmaker comes to Hollywood, knows the script is shit, and makes it anyway? I mean, I think that's projecting a lot onto, like, obviously he found something in this script which he wanted to do. I don't think any filmmaker sees, oh, this is a terrible script, so I'm just going to throw a bunch of Dutch angles in here and it'll be great.
And spiders.
I mean, obviously he felt this was a story he could tell. I just don't think he told it well.
Okay, I think that's fair. Corey, I want to give you a chance to talk here, man.
Yeah, I'm with you, actually. I agree. I think the script is shit. It's kind of like at least 40 minutes into the movie, it falls apart from making any kind of sense. There's no logical reason why any character would do anything. And the only reason I continued to enjoy it is just because it was such a kind of feast to look at, to listen to, the score, the sound design, cinematography, the violence. Like,
it's a comedy.
I had a great time in spite of just my rational mind knowing, this doesn't make any sense. But at a certain point, I just kind of went with it and the fairy tale and just thought, I liked it, even though I agree with, like I said, most of the points in Rod's review about stuff he didn't respond to.
But then here's the question, and this kind of drives back to Rod's point. If this was directed by a first-time filmmaker no one had ever heard of, would you guys be giving it the same appraisal?
I believe I
Actually,
would.
it probably would, because it's so audacious that a first-time filmmaker, people fall over first-time filmmakers, and it's so audacious that they would love it. A better analogy, Kevin, would be if this was done by some guy who'd done 3 or 4 movies and he'd done like a lot of, like, I don't know, if he was not considered an auteur. Would you have that's
Hollywood
what
fare, maybe?
Yeah.
Like Mark Wahlberg, video game adaptations, and then this, then would you?
Right.
feel that?
I think people would have I'm not saying that the critical, response would have been completely different, but I think some people might have treated it a little differently.
I think that's fair.
And that's where I'm getting into auteurism, where it's so slightly damaging, because that was sort of my whole point. I felt like if this wasn't directed by Chan-wook Park and was directed by, say,
Xavier Jens.
PSW Anderson or whatever, that Harmon White loves. If it was directed by him, would everybody love this movie? Would they say? I'm not saying they wouldn't. Would they say it's a triumph of his style finally coming together? You know what I mean? I also feel the same way a little bit about The Masters. Like I feel like certain, would have certain people like this movie if it wasn't directed? If it was just directed by, random foreign film person that you've never heard of, would everyone have gone ape for it?
I think I would have, but I think we've got someone on the show here right now that's really apt to talk about this. Corey, why don't you talk about it a little bit, because you are one. I think you're the main guy running Cigarettes and Red Vines, the I have to admit, the awesome Paul Thomas Anderson fan site.
Yeah, I co-run it with another guy, CJ Wallace, who's been doing it from the beginning. In the last 2 or 3 years, I came on and started doing that with him. So I do wear a bit of a different hat over there than with the playlist. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you talk? I mean, what do you think as far as what is Rod is getting at with The Master specifically? Because I know you love that film.
Yeah, I did. And I'll tell you what, the first time I saw it, I didn't love it. I found a lot to appreciate, but it still definitely kept me at a little bit of a distance. And it wasn't till maybe a second viewing and a third viewing that I truly started to kind of appreciate what it was and fully love it. Now, the question is, you know, would I have seen it a second time and given it a second chance, you know, had it been some director that I wasn't as familiar with? Maybe I wouldn't have. But I don't think that changes that the movie's value was kind of there for me to, you know, pick up on or not. So
well, I do think that oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Corey. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that to me that proves that, or shows that there is some value in the fact that into what we're talking about, there's at least some positive side to it, where it never hurts to reevaluate any film you see, whether you liked it first time or second time. Like another thing to reference Roger Ebert is that the guy proved that with his Brown Bunny review, that a film, your opinion on a film can change through time, or if the film is different than the last time you saw it. And I think there's value in being open to the fact that your opinions change through time. Opinions are fluid.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you know, maybe being a huge fan of Paul Thomas Anderson got you to appreciate that film in the way it maybe deserves. And I do think there's value there.
Right, but at the same time, is there what happens to that other film that you saw by whoever that you just go, well, I don't like that, and I don't know who this guy is, and I don't subscribe to that brand, or I'm not an adherent of that person, therefore I'm not going to give it a second look, and it just goes into the dustbin of forgotten.
Yeah, I one that springs to mind, I just recently saw the Jackie Robinson biopic, 42, which was written and directed by Brian Helgeland, who's not exactly an auteur, but the dude won an Oscar deservedly for LA Confidential's script. I mean, he wrote at least one amazing script, in my opinion, but that movie, I am never going to think about that movie again, and it's not terrible, but it's not very good, and I'm kind of done with that movie. I saw it, I left the theater, and I joked about it for a half an hour, and then I'm not ever going to watch it again. So that's not really fair to that movie, I have to admit. Kevin, why don't you go? Kevin.
Yeah, sorry. I think I agree with Rod in a sense that there is, you know, it's true. I mean, I think all of us here, you know, if we watch so many movies, if there's something that doesn't connect with us, you know, if it's made by, like, you know, I don't know, Bob Smith, our chances of revisiting it probably it's probably not going to be at the top of our priority list. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong, like, with rewarding a filmmaker with a second shot if you've liked their previous work. I mean, I think it's just following a natural inclination. I mean, I think you would do that with a band too. If they release an album that maybe you don't love off the first listen, you'll probably give it another spin at some point, because you have that relationship with the band. I think you have a relationship with a filmmaker. If The Master or whatever it is doesn't connect the first time out, I think there's a shot. I mean, that's the way it was for me too. I mean, the first time I saw The Master, I was like, it's all right, it's good. But then the second time, I picked up on a lot more, and it really resonated a bit deeper. Now, does that mean I loved it out and out? No, I still think it's a little cold. I have my little issues with it, but I'm glad I gave it that second chance. So I guess my point is that I think we develop relationships to films and filmmakers, and sometimes it's rewarded with a second viewing. I don't think that's unnatural, or I think it just comes with the territory of following a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's not unnatural, but perhaps it is unfair when we don't do it for the other filmmakers, which is just,
true.
You know, it's too bad, but it is the reality.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Well,
yeah,
I guess I'll say, in addition to just a filmmaker, you know, rewarding it a second viewing, you know, you're not going to give maybe something that's kind of middling or something you outright hate another viewing. But maybe if it's that movie that shows up on all the best of year lists and people won't stop talking about it, and then it ends up on the decade list, a few years down the line, then it is something that you might want to go back and go, well, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I will give this a second shot. And I'll say that, in my defense, kind of something that people will ask me from time to time, running the Paul Thomas Anderson site, they go, what would you do if you didn't like the movie? And I go, I don't really know. And luckily, I haven't had to deal with that. But if that's the case, if I don't like something, then there's really not anything I can do about it. I mean, I don't have to review it, but I can't trick myself into liking something that I don't like. And I'll give you the example, which is someone I brought up earlier, Wes Anderson, who at the beginning of this decade, I was probably just as big a fan of his work. And then basically it took 3 movies for me to kind of fall completely out. And, the first one, Life Aquatic, which was, I was kind of saw it. I liked a lot about it. And then there were some things that didn't work. So I was kind of in denial a little bit. Darjeeling Limited was kind of like, it was okay. So I was kind of disinterested. And then Fantastic Mr. Fox, even though I know I'm in the minority, I adamantly just disliked it. And I thought Moonrise Kingdom was his least successful live action movie. So I went from, being a fanboy to being, the opposite in a decade.
Yeah, Corey, we're lining up a lot today because Moonrise Kingdom is probably, I would say, is his weakest film too, but yet I didn't hate that movie by any means. And I think I've watched that 2 or 3 times now.
Why that one? Why that one and not all the other ones? Like, does it have to be is it because, I love this guy, so I like this one a little bit less, and I like this one a little. Like, my least favorite, I think, is the Darjeeling, because I think it has got the least amount of substance, and it's the least, and I don't mind it, but it's just, so you know what I mean? Like, why is it that, like, is it you love this person, then I love him a little less, and then I love him a little less, and then I finally let him go? Like,
no,
does it has to be that linear? I don't know. That's just my question, because I feel like. I feel like Wes's career, and I'm a big fan, or was, like Corey, but it's, for me, it's not done. I'm just still observing, and I don't have, I'm not on team Wes Anderson or off team Wes Anderson. I don't want it to be that black and white. I'm just, and I don't want it to be that black and white about anything. You know what I mean? Like, and I guess that's just my point that I'm going to keep pushing. I don't want. You know what I mean? I don't think that's healthy in any way.
True, but I think there is something to be said about a filmmaker if he has let you down, or if you've been not into their work for the past 2 or 3 films. I think it is valid to be kind of just not interested in what they're going to do next. I guess I was just going to say, if a filmmaker has let you down a few times, I don't think it's inconceivable to sort of be dismissive or disappointed or just not into whatever they're going to do next. Like, for me, Brian De Palma, he hasn't made a good film in 30 years. I was, however long, I'm just using that number. I think Eric said it earlier.
Yeah.
But like, I went to see Passion last year at TIFF, and I was looking forward to it. I like both actresses, Rachel McAdams, Noomi Rapace, whatever. But it is an awful, terrible movie. Like, it is like straight to DVD terrible. And I know we said no hyperbole, but I'm not exaggerating. And I didn't even stay for the whole thing because it was so bad. I just had to do other things. And I think that was a film too that got a lot of passes from a lot of critics because it's Brian De Palma, and they're like, oh, well, he must, he meant to do this, and this is such his style.
Well, there's 2 things. I mean, one, Brian De Palma, going back to Stoker. I guess I feel a little bit about Passion the way I think maybe Corey and Eric felt about Stoker. It's like I found some of and this is where I don't think Stoker's at all funny, but I think Passion is actually really arch and really devilish and like
intentionally.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh wow, I disagree.
And its first half is delicious and ridiculous, and there's a lot of De Palmaites and De Palma adherents, and a lot of them love the second half of his career, the one that you're saying is terrible. And again, I've been trying to understand that
because I don't want to just go, oh my God, these people are retarded. They don't know what they're talking about. And I think like I think the first half of Passion is really funny and just like this ridiculous, over the top, which is what he does. I mean, it's funny, we're getting real thematic here because we're talking about Hitchcock and Chandler Park and De Palma, and De Palma is he's a Hitchcockite. He took Hitchcock's complete MO, and then he put his stamp on it. You know what I mean? And then he applied his aesthetics to become something different. But he was very much a student of Hitchcock. But I guess my point is I find Passion. I think the second half gets ridiculous to the point where it finally breaks. You know what I mean? It's bending, it's bending,
Yeah.
it's bending, and then it breaks.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I guess it really depends, because De Palma's the kind of guy where he really pushes that to a limit where it either sustains and it holds and it works really well, or it doesn't and it kind of falls apart. For me, his particular tone totally fell apart on Passion, but by the same token, I will totally watch Femme Fatale and enjoy it, and it's ridiculous. It's pretty over the top and terrible, but it's also, I think in that film too, there's a lot of I think his tone of like, of just always being on the edge of, I don't know, self-parody, I guess. Kind of.
Yeah, it's a real fine line, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I really dislike critics, I guess, if they want to say it that way, people who put a huge premium on visuals, and that like every film that they love is because it's a visual story, and it's like, and that's part of like, I need some sustenance, I need some soul. I don't just want a visual jerk off, which is part of the reason why Stoker leaves me completely cold. And then at the same time, I see value in Passion, because I find it has a little bit more texture of humor to it. So I guess it's always subjective, but it's interesting how we bring up all these ideas, and some contradict some of the others. I feel like that's healthy and good.
Yeah, I agree. And, just to bridge off of what, Rod, you're just saying is, look at To the Wonder, that one of the things I thought of immediately after leaving that film is like, my God, because that film, I think if anybody's given it a pass, it might be because the visuals are, as always in a Malick film, they're beautiful. But do you guys think that he'd be better served if he made like a Baraka or Koyaanisqatsi and just ditched narrative altogether and just made like wordless, not necessarily nature documentaries, but like, art documentaries?
I don't.
Oh, come on.
Maybe,
He'd make the
think
best version of Baraka. He'd make. I just think.
I don't know.
I don't
To
think
me,
he's interested. I don't think he's interested.
No,
in
I
what
think
gets
no, I think he's
interested.
interested in ideas. I mean, I think he's a great visualist. He always kind of has been. But for me, what made Tree of Life and To the Wonder interesting are the ideas in them.
Mm-hmm.
If I just want to watch a bunch of like a montage, then I guess I'll go watch Baraka or whatever. But for me, what makes Tree of Life and To the Wonder compelling, or that he's reaching out to try and address some pretty weighty issues, and agreeably, I agree, he doesn't always hit it, and he doesn't always make it clear, and it's maybe not be the most concise narrative. I think, for me personally, as a movie watcher, I just find that reach in and of itself kind of fascinating and enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, his ambition is always impressive, and it's going to keep me going to watch all of his movies, which leads me to another point of that. De Palma's another one too. I don't like his movies anymore, but I'm always going to... You guys just made me want to see Passion. I had so little interest, but I'm going to watch that whenever I get a chance,
It's
So
juicy and
Yeah.
fun in the beginning.
I'll watch the second half at some point, I guess.
That's fair. That you owe it to the movie, Kevin. Come on.
I guess.
I think you do. I think you do, and I think as well. You never reviewed it, so that's good. But
Well, no, I
obviously,
wouldn't. I would never review a movie I didn't see the whole thing of.
Good man. Corey, any filmmakers that you think have become, besides a Wes Anderson that you described, that maybe we could cite as they've kind of become a parody of themselves, which I think you could argue is something that maybe happened with Terrence Malick with To the Wonder?
Off the top of my head, no. Other than the kind of the two that we've been discussing. Maybe.
I got one for
I
you,
don't
Corey.
even know that it. Okay, yeah,
No,
go ahead.
and I think you'll be able to talk about it specifically because you saw at TIFF last year Francis Ford Coppola's Twixt, correct?
Oh, that was the year before actually.
Okay. And I'm assuming there's a reason we have not been able to see that movie in certain theaters now. And I think I remember you saying that that was the worst movie you saw at Toronto. And we don't need to get into the hyperbole of that, of course, but maybe talk about how Francis Ford Coppola maybe has become a parody of himself.
I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would chalk that up to.
It doesn't
anything.
fall in line. Okay.
Yeah, no, I actually admire what he's done. I mean, his last 3 movies, for however much I enjoyed or didn't think they were successful.
Yeah.
I don't think he should be on some different path, and I'm not disappointed in Twixt or Youth Without Youth, because I feel like he should be making something on the scale of The Godfather, Apocalypse Now. I like that he's kind of tried to get back to his roots. I just didn't feel that Twixt was a necessarily successful way to do that.
Did you get to see that in 3D, by the way? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it was about 5 or 10 minutes were in 3D.
Did you get the Edgar Allan Poe mask or whatever, or was that just Comic-Con?
That was at Comic-Con, which I was actually at that panel also.
Yeah, because weren't people excited after that panel, and then
they really were, yeah.
and then they saw it at Toronto, and I heard nothing about that movie for so long. So
yeah, I mean, he talked about doing a kind of cross-country tour where they would kind of remix the movie live as it was happening, and
on
it's
an
going to
iPad.
happen in the fall, and it never happened. I haven't heard anything about it since Toronto.
I think it just got such mediocre reviews at Toronto. I think that a lot of those ambitious ideas, which probably just the enthusiasm for those may have dissipated, and there's obviously not a lot of distributors who want to get behind a film like that. If it had been a huge hit, I bet you those things would have happened. But it's almost worse than terrible, and worse than, it's in that horrible purgatory space where it's people just forgotten it. It's not even hated or loved. It's just kind of there, and that's
sad.
Yeah, it's a bad space for it. So he may never, maybe he'll get some sort of self-distribution, like Kareth is doing with Upstream Color, which is...
Well, yeah, Coppola is fully capable of doing that. I mean, he funds these movies himself. He could do that. And I was being a little facetious when I led into Coppola, because he's sort of a bit of a counter to what we're getting at, or he's a filmmaker that's trying to maybe not reinvent himself, but sort of reignite his fervor and his energy of youth, And I actually really like Tetro.
Tetro is one of my favorite uneven films.
Yes, dude. Yes.
It is really uneven, but it is one of my favorites, and it's
messy, right? Like we talked about
before. It's really
before.
messy, it's got so much emotional value to it, and man, by the time that movie was done, I was emotionally kind of floored by some of it.
I'm with you, man, for sure.
Man, Frank, I feel the same way actually about Youth Without Youth. It's not a perfect film by any means, but I think it's really fascinating and interesting, and when it works, I think it's really powerful stuff. I think the exciting thing about Coppola, even if Tetro and Youth Without Youth and Twixt don't work all the way through, I mean, at least he's reaching out and mixing it up. Lucas for the last God knows how long has kept saying he wants to go and make these little experimental films and go back to what he did at the beginning of his career, but he hasn't at all. So
yeah, but do you think that'll happen now that he sold his Star Wars empire?
I don't know. I kind of just don't care.
I know. I don't really either. But hey, if he does,
I'll be totally there and interested.
We're there. Yeah, absolutely.
Will he actually do it? We'll see. I mean, every time he tries to step away from Star Wars, he inevitably pulls back in. So
yeah, he's like Pacino in Godfather 3.
Something like that, yeah.
Here's another one I'd like to throw out there, guys, that I think is the worst example, or just a filmmaker that has truly become a parody of themselves and I just don't care about anymore. Tim Burton.
Just never been much of a fan.
Really? Oh, really? Not even like Edward Scissorhands or Ed Wood?
Yeah, I like those movies, and I guess, yeah, maybe what you're saying is right. I just don't feel like he's got maybe 3 or 4 movies that I think are really great, and that's it. But I don't think I ever considered myself I don't like those Batman movies. I never liked them at the time.
They haven't aged well.
Disagree.
Corey,
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
like the Tim Burton
Yeah.
Batman movie. It's
dude,
all
Batman
right.
Returns is solid, but his first Batman is not
I've never
terrible.
been able to sit through the second one.
Oh, DeVito's great as I like the sequel. I think it's
I
better
think-
than his first one, actually.
I just think the thing with Tim Burton is he just for the past decade got lost in tentpole land.
He's become
Well,
George
he's
Lucas.
also even before he
Yeah.
wasn't uh, lost in Temple Land. He was just so one note.
Yeah, but couldn't you say that about Wes Anderson? Even the films
Yeah,
that he
yeah.
loves.
That's true. Maybe I just never liked that note.
Yep, agree. That's
Yeah,
sort of
no,
what it comes
I
down
think
to.
he sits in a very particular niche, but that niche for me is interesting when it comes together well. But for me, he's just been lost in sort of I don't know, kind of boring tentpoles that I'm just not interested in.
Well,
Like,
But
more-
I think what he signed up to do his next film is like kind of going back to his Ed Wood days. I mean, it's a straight up drama.
yeah.
So
written by
that
the
to
guy
me,
Who-
yeah, and
who- Ed Wood too.
yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
that to me, that's really interesting. So I mean, I'm kind of curious to see where that goes. So
Hey, Rod, you said that the
yeah.
film is written by the same writers of Ed Wood?
I believe so. I believe it's the same writers who did Ed Wood, and I think Ed Wood is his best film aside from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which I think they need to put out like a 10-disc Criterion.
Oh, yes.
I think
yes.
it's like one of the greatest movies ever made.
They should do it with the show. Criterion could do an awesome package deal with
Also,
that.
and I'm being completely sincere. Like, also just as a screenwriting thing, like if anyone wants to learn, like, you want a perfect example of 3-act structure, like
Yes.
study that film. It's brilliant.
I like it. Very nice. Corey, I felt like you were going to chime in there earlier and you got cut off. Anything you wanted to say about Tim Burton or?
Yeah, I mean, he was my entire childhood, basically, from Pee-wee to Beetlejuice to the Batman movies to Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, all of that stuff was a big part of me growing up and just really loving kind of all those movies. And then beyond Ed Wood, I think I loved Sleepy Hollow. But other than that, it's been 20 years since I've really cared for any of his movies, which is a bummer. And it's hard to say what exactly to chalk that up to. I mean, obviously some of the, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, tentpole type stuff, it's easy to kind of point out why that doesn't work. But then on the other hand, even something like Frankenweenie, which on paper is like, it's his idea, it's going to be more personal, it's going to be in his wheelhouse, and I just didn't think that worked either. And I think maybe part of it is just kind of him being beholden to being a director who doesn't really know what a good script is. And I guess he kind of lucked out earlier in his career by getting Edward Scissorhands also. God, forgot
Yes,
about that.
that's my
which is
favorite.
Just great. And but he just hasn't gotten any for a long time, and has fully admitted in interviews he doesn't know the difference. So I think that's one of the differences between writer directors and directors who are beholden to the material. Is you can see why in every script he picks he's attracted to certain elements, but whether it comes together or not is kind of only partially in his control, really. I guess.
Yeah.
And I actually thought, to tie it back a little bit, one of the things when I was watching Stoker, I thought, this is what, if Tim Burton had taken a different turn in his career, this is maybe what he'd be doing.
Yeah.
Some of those
Interesting.
horror gothic elements, and that would have been, I think, a really interesting sort of movie. I mean, one of the biggest disappointments is that Tim Burton has never made an out-and-out horror movie. Sleepy
Yes.
Hollow is probably the closest he's gotten to it.
What
But,
about
that's
what's the
inspired
musical
by
he made? What about the musical?
Sweeney Todd, but that's a musical, and
Yeah,
there are
that's
horror
true.
elements for sure, and Sleepy Hollow has some horror elements, but a straight up horror movie, and it doesn't have to be a modern horror. It can still be inspired by, Mario Bava or whoever else, but it would be great to see him just do, a full on horror movie without a wink and without, God, what was the Dark Shadows last summer, the kind of soap opera elements and just stuff that is not working for him.
When you bring up Sweeney Todd and you think, if you said to me, Tim Burton's going to make a horror musical, I'm like there. That sounds like so awesome to me.
Yep.
But Sweeney Todd was, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not a huge Sondheim fan. So, but it just left me kind of like, there was elements of it I liked, and I think it had a good sense of humor, but I didn't completely love it.
I think his last films from, definitely this past decade, but even further back to even Sleepy Hollow, I'd say, they all sound awesome on paper, especially as a Tim Burton movie. And in execution, with the bigger budgets he gets, he's just so much less interesting because he's such a great craftsman. When he had to build puppets and use makeup to create his effects in his older films, that he's a filmmaker that for me works better in the tactile world, not the digital realm. And also, I think Nightmare Before Christmas is a really interesting one to bring up because, of course, he didn't direct that movie. Henry Selick did, and I think part of the danger of auteur worship is that he's being credited for something by everybody thinks that's a Tim Burton movie, and it's not. It's a fucking Henry Selick movie, you know?
Yeah.
And I just think that's a little dangerous there. But I mean, Corey, I'm not saying I'm sure you knew that or you didn't meant to say that. I didn't mean to imply that you were doing that, but that is a dangerous thing that the general audience thinks that's a fucking Tim Burton movie, and it's not. It's a Henry Selick movie.
But maybe we're getting into the exact same thing that we're trying to avoid is just like this auteurism. We keep talking about these filmmakers. What do you think about this guy? And what do you think about his brand? And how has his brand like evolved over the years? Or how has it sustained itself? Or how has it is it as valuable to you as it always been? Is that dangerous again? Are we getting into this? You know, one thing that I would love to do, and I want someone to hopefully listen and take me up on this. It'll never happen. I want to do the blind taste test film festival.
Yes.
I want Paul Thomas Anderson. I want some of these huge big auteurs to make films, and you go in and it's like, but you don't have any clue who directed what. There's no credits.
Yes.
And it's the blind film taste test cinema festival, and everybody, you see like 20 films, and but like, you know, I guess people would participate, but you don't even know going in. You have no clue. You just have an inkling that, like, because maybe like the first year gone by, and then you found out after the fact that David Fincher made something, and you know, and then Paul S.W. Anderson made something, and it's free of all that, and you just go in and you see movies and you have no clue who did them. I think like you cannot get any more. And then people review those, and then you do not. It's not revealed until after the fact.
That is a fucking great idea.
I think that would be so awesome.
Well, maybe the playlist needs to get into festivals or programming like something like Twitch or, you know, like the Alamo Drafthouse, because it's a really good idea, man.
Would never happen, but
you never know.
I would love to just see someone go, I fucking hated that movie, and then they find out afterwards it's their favorite filmmaker. I would just like, I would just laugh. That would be my dream.
I think you just want to see some people with egg on their face.
Yes, but also at the same time, I also would just think, don't you think that's fascinating, like experiment? And like
as an experience, it would be really fun.
Don't you think it'd be interesting how people would just treat things potentially, not necessarily absolutely, but potentially different because they had no idea who it was made by?
I think it's definitely going to lead to a lot more honesty from even all of us, I think, because I think it's hard to avoid the love that we do have or the dislike we have for a filmmaker. While we all do try to go in open-minded, and we should, that's something we need to strive for, you know, when we're critically evaluating a film.
I think that baggage exists in everybody, and I think that's part of our conversation here.
Yep.
Is to just explore that. You know, I don't think there's necessarily any good or bad here, again, in our discussion of this. I think it's an exploration of this topic.
I think what Rod is maybe driving at is that auteurism or the sort of brand devotion sort of just gets in the way of sort of that sense of pure discovery. You know, like kind of like when you're flipping around maybe late at night and you catch a movie halfway through and you have no idea what it is, but it's awesome, and you just sit there and you just kind of, and then you figure out, oh, it's this or this or this. I think what we're really trying to strive here for is, at least for me, like what keeps me interested in movies is that sense of discovery. And I think I think, you know, because we cover news and this and that a lot of noise gets in the way of that sometimes.
Agreed. So, I think of a filmmaker that we definitely champion on the playlist with his first 3 films is Ben Wheatley. Was like this discovery for me, and I think all of us. When I saw Down Terrace, I was just like, who is this guy? Like, I can't wait to follow him, and he has not disappointed me with 3 films. I've loved his first 3 films a lot, and hopefully I don't get too lost in my personal affection for him as a filmmaker, but that was a wonderful sense of discovery, and now I'm already a little worried that maybe I'm liking, you know, I need to give him a fair shot with each film, you know? It can happen to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, at the same time, I think it's funny that we're discussing this, and people on the outside might go like, well, yeah, but you guys all like this. You know what I mean?
Oh, they'll do that. They'll do that.
And I think by proxy of what we do and by nature of what we do, and by nature of what we cover, I think it always, and this is just, I guess, what happens is like a distillation happens, and then it's like these guys like these things, and I think there's probably some sort of truth to that. Just like as you would say, well, that blog, they like those things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like I think, and maybe these podcasts are good because we get time to explore and I guess what I'm saying is sometimes it can end up being reductive.
Yeah.
And it can just be sort of like, well, I guess it's to my point a little bit too about brands and identity. Like I feel like a lot of this stuff is like, well, I read so-and-so site because they define what I like, and what I like defines me.
Yeah.
And I find that's a part of auteurism, and maybe dangerous maybe is a little hard of a word, but it's just part of this thing that I've been thinking about a lot. I even think about it in terms of social media, in terms of every day we're broadcasting our identity, what we like, what we dislike, how we every like, every share, everything is a reinforcement of my identity. I am gonna tweet about this and tweet about that, and that can I think some of that ties into the brand. Like you're almost trying to reinforce that, hey, I love this thing, and here I am tweeting about it, and I think some of that stuff can be a little bit it affects the conversation and the discourse too, because it's just like the race to say something after a movie on Twitter. Like I even myself, I used to be like, I'm not going to tweet anything about this movie. You're going to read the review, and that's what it's going to be. But I found myself after Sundance feeling compelled to put something out there because everybody else does. But it's not in my nature to, for a long time I was always like, why tweet out your review? Because then that ends up being your review. It's like it's like your 140 characters are defined, your definition of that film, or your defined take on that film. And I feel like in some ways I don't want to do that, because I want a review that is hopefully more nuanced and more flavored to give all my thoughts on the film that hopefully have more than just this is good or bad.
Agreed.
So I guess in a way this is how I feel about brands and identity, and how these things can be unhealthy.
You're also speaking to a cultural shift too, where in the when we were growing up, we didn't have when all of us were growing up, we didn't have internet and social media. So we went to see a movie, we left the movie, maybe we talked about it with our few friends, but it would coalesce in our mind, and we'd think about it more, and then as we discussed it further, the ideas and thoughts we had about it would build up. Now we're in an age where you're right, where people come out of a movie, they put, I love this, I hated this, whatever, and then that's it. That's the conversation.
Yep.
So I think what maybe Rod's driving at is maybe there's something to be said about having discussions rather than reactions when it comes to film.
At what point does kind of a relationship between the viewer and the filmmaker kind of calcify, or just become, if I see one movie and I love it, am I automatically on that director's team? Does it take a second movie, a third movie? At what point does it go from I enjoyed that to now you're kind of on board with seeing whatever they're going to do next? And I'd be interested to see at what point that happens for people. Where's the line, basically?
Yeah, I think it's really complex, and if we've gotten anything across to listeners and hopefully other readers of the playlist, is that it's way more complex than that, and it's let's embrace the grays, not the black and white, like Rod said, and encourage discussion, because I think, Twitter and all these things are great tools, but it is reductive, and use all that. It's effective to communicate what you think, but I think the most healthy thing is a discussion and a curiosity for these films. And also, I encourage anybody to read negative reviews of films they love, or positive reviews of films that they hate, because I learned more about my feelings on Park Chan-wook and Stoker than I ever have, based off of knowing Rod's reactions and reviews and talking to him about it before I saw the film. And I have a much more articulate opinion on that film as a result. And I think that's a really good, healthy thing that we can all agree on. So yeah, I think that's a really great place for us to wrap up here, guys. I want to thank Corey Everett for coming on. Corey, where can Of course, we can find you writing and doing things for the playlist, but where else can people find you online?
You can check out all your Paul Thomas Anderson news at sigsandredvines.blogspot, and you can find me on Twitter at modage, MODAGE.
Okay, and Kevin, where can we find you on Twitter? We know you're on the playlist.
I forgot my Twitter handle, actually. I don't know. I never use that account. I'm on the playlist Twitter, and I'm obviously on the site.
I've been trying to think of my own personal Twitter because I sometimes think I tweet things that are probably like I probably should. Yeah, I'm an inappropriate person. Let's face it. But I was hoping to find a solo place to tweet inappropriate places, but I still haven't come up with a good name. But
yeah, so. I think you need to do that. But otherwise, people can find Rodrigo Perez on Twitter at the playlist, correct?
Yeah.
And of course, all the work we do on the playlist, which is part of the IndieWire blog network. You can find me, Eric McClanahan, on Twitter at Adjust Your Track, which is my other podcast I do weekly. Check that out if you like. With that, I really want to thank all three of you guys who've been really generous with your time, and it's fun when we get together to chat about these big topics, and I'm really proud of this one. So good work, guys. Yeah, thanks again, guys. Have a good day.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye. And just lastly, if you guys will allow me to just completely be ironic and counter with what I think is kind of reductive but kind of fun, and you guys can squash this if you think it's stupid. But can we finish by saying, by each citing a moment from To the Wonder, if you have one, that isn't pure example of how Malick is maybe becoming a parody of himself, or is that stupid?
That's a little silly.
All right.
Unless, I don't know, Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, Kevin, because you liked it a lot. I think I don't want
to. I haven't seen it in like a year, so I'm kind of
okay.
But I wouldn't know. Like, I don't know.
Also, as part of this discussion, if you're gonna say we should be open and everything, and now let's talk about the thing that's the most parody-like,
I know.
A pretty big contradiction.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna indulge myself. The fucking scene where Rachel McAdams has rope tied around her hands and she goes, "I trust you," like. That gave me a huge eye roll. But even worse, I have to say, I hated the moment in Tree of Life where the mask is floating in the ocean at the end. Like, I think that is such a generic, pretentious shot. But it was beaten by the shot of Rachel McAdams like wandering through the dark house in like a nightmare, and she sees a like baby doll in a crib, and the light just passes over it. I don't even know if you guys remember it, but I just saw the movie.
Nope.
Oh, well.
I don't remember. I saw it about a week ago. But I would say, Tree of Life, man, like in comparison, and I hate to compare, but I think Tree of Life is like massively sustenance heavy and nutritious compared to The Wonder.
Agreed.
Me too.
Agreed.
To the Wonder has value too. I just feel like part of it is that movie is like it's trying to capture ephemeral things, and then therefore it becomes ephemeral, and there's just very little to latch onto.
Agreed. And I said at the top of the show that I still stand by. I think it's so far one of the worst movies I've seen this year, but I think there's a lot of value in that film as well. And you guys have definitely kind of made me think about that even more and consider it. And I didn't mean to be so reductive to the film because it's seriously, it is worth talking.
It's the worst movie of the year, but I'm open. I got an open.
I am. I mean, I
will say that Stoker is actually probably the worst movie I've seen this year. But...
And fair enough. But Rod, seriously though, can I have both opinions? Can I think that it's terrible but totally worth talking for an hour and a half about?
Yeah, I guess so. Because it's hard for me to articulate how I feel about Stoker because I'm not.
You got it out there.
Yeah, I got it out of my system, so I have zero hate towards Stoker.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean too.
I don't hate it either. I just think it's colossally misguided.
That's okay. That is exactly what I mean to say about To the Wonder.